Hello, I'm Georgia Churchill, the storyteller. How about an ancient Alaska Native Eskimo story? This is an ancient story, and the people of Alaska, way up by the North Pole, had a hard time living way, way back, long before any Europeans came to this side of the world. It's so cold up there, it's almost always frozen, and everyone had to do their job just right. The men had to hunt and fish and deal with half wild sled dogs. The women had to get bones from the leg of a seagull to make a needle and dry out seal gut to use for thread, and then they had to sew the skins of the animals into clothes that would keep their family warm so they wouldn't freeze. It was very hard to live. And if someone could not do their fair share of the work, in this story it's a woman who got too old, then they were expected to go out onto the ice and freeze themselves to death. It's not a bad death, you just sort of fall asleep. That way, the people who couldn't work wouldn't take food from the people who had to work. It's much different than our culture, isn't it? Long ago, way up on the shore of Alaska, by the Arctic Ocean, there was a bit of land that stuck out into the ocean, and some people had built a village there. It was fine in the winter when everything was frozen. The surface of the Arctic Ocean froze and the dog sleds could go out on it, and the tundra, the land where no trees grow, froze, and so the dog sleds could go there. But in the very short summer, when the snow melted and the ice softened, oh my goodness, the mosquitoes. They were horrible. They'd rise up in huge black clouds, and the people would take their umiaks, their great big skin boats made out of animal skins with the fur taken off. They'd get in their umiaks and they'd row across the Arctic Ocean that would thaw by this time out to an island where they would spend their summer months there hunting and fishing and having a nice vacation, I suppose. And then when the weather got cold, they would come back to their village in their umiaks. The time I'm telling you about, when it was time for the people to leave and go to their summer island, they left an old woman behind. She was too old to work anymore, and she knew it. She wasn't angry with them for leaving her. She knew it was her time to die, but she wasn't quite sure she was ready to anyway. So after they had gone, she would walk along the edge of the ocean where the mosquitoes weren't bad and hunt for little things that had washed up onto the beach and eat everything she found. The only thing that bothered her was she was so lonesome. So one day she found a little worm and she kept it as a pet. And everything she'd find to eat, she'd give half of it to the worm and she'd eat the other half. And the worm grew. It grew big enough to crawl along the beach with her and help her look for food. And they would share everything they found equally. And the worm grew. And in time, the worm got so large it could go out onto the tundra and catch rabbits and bring them back to her, and they would share the food equally. And the worm grew. It grew so big that it could go out onto the tundra and catch a caribou, a wild reindeer, and drag it back. Well, by the time the worm had gotten this large, the weather was getting cold again, and the old woman was so happy because now she knew her people would be coming back, and she wouldn't have to die because she had the worm to do hunting for her, and that would be her fair share of the work. Oh, she saw the umiaks approaching the shore. She was so excited. But the worm was angry because these people had left his old woman alone to die, and the worm got red with anger. As the people got out of their umiaks, the worm went crawling down to the beach, and he crawled all over the people and crushed them. The old woman saw her worm crushing her villagers. She was afraid of her worm. She turned and started hobbling away from him as fast as she could. He turned to expecting her to thank him, but when he saw her hobbling away from him, he turned red with anger again, went crawling after her, and crushed her. And ever since then, there has never been anyone who lived in a place where a worm destroyed a village. That's an ancient Eskimo story. I used to tell stories in classrooms, and sometimes I would narrate while the children acted out the story. In one first grade, a little girl was the old woman, and as the worm grew larger, we'd add children so they'd hang onto each other's shoulders and make a long worm. And the other children, who were the villagers, would sit behind each other and paddle their umiaks. And when they came back to the village, when it started getting cold again, and the worm crawled down all these children, holding on to each other's shoulders, of the first child at the worm's head going rawr, 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 and all the other parts of the worm going rawr, rawr, rawr. They went crawling down to crush the villagers. Of course, they didn't really hurt them. They didn't even touch them, but everyone works together, so it looks as though they're being crushed. All the village children fell over, obligingly, dead, being crushed. And then the girl who played the old woman saw the worm coming back toward her, and she ran out of the classroom, out the door, down the hall of the school, into the girls' bathroom. I guess she didn't want to be crushed. I love these funny old stories. Thank you so much for sharing them with me. Bye.